Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Maury Aronson, the Director of Artistic Programs at Global Arts Live. Global Arts Live is a not-for-profit presenting organization located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that presents concerts in Cambridge, Boston, and Somerville. To celebrate our fall season and back to live performances, we are hosting a few virtual talks with artists whose work we will see in theaters this fall. In addition to tonight's conversation, you can look forward to one more virtual talk with choreographer Raphael Xavier, November 16. Tonight, we are joined by Boston Dance Theater's artistic director, Jessie Stinnett, and choreographer Rosie Herrera will join us at a later time in the discussion. We will present Boston Dance Theater this Friday and Saturday at the ICA Theater in Boston. Jessie, so good to see you, and thank you for participating in the conversation.
Thank you, Maury. Great to be here.
Thanks. So you have been very busy. The company's been very busy throughout the pandemic era, and I really want to commend you for that. I think that you kept your dancers working, you kept creating work. I saw, we did a virtual performance with the company, but I want to talk about Surge just for a little bit. It's such a magnificent work that you created for film, and it's beautifully shot, it's beautifully danced, and it has such a strong message. Can you just spend a couple minutes telling us about that project?
Yeah, thank you, Maury. That's, first of all, really kind, and I appreciate that. I want to say that, I feel so fortunate that I have just a great team of collaborators who are really just willing to dive into anything. And so during the pandemic, we had, right before the lockdown in Boston, we'd received some support from Boston Center for the Arts and from Boston Dance Alliance to sort of kick off a project that I had been brainstorming and sort of researching for a while that sits on the intersection of art, science, and climate activism. And I was really interested in looking at sea level rise and its relationship to climate change, being from Boston, spending quite a lot of time in the Seaport District where we're performing the ICA right there on the water, being really aware of the fact that, our city is prone to flooding. And, just sort of when I was starting to understand the story of sea level rise locally and then also globally, I felt really drawn to learning more about it. I ended up actually doing a training with Al Gore's Climate Reality Leadership Program. So I took a really deep dive into, my own personal climate activism, and that has sort of led me into this project with Boston Dance Theater and Dr. Larry J. Pratt, who's a senior researcher at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. So Surge initially, as I said, before the pandemic, was a project that we were planning to present on the Boston Center for the Arts campus in a theater space. I received the Boston Dance Makers Residency and Retreat Award for that. Of course, the pandemic came, lockdown happened, everything changed, world fell upside down, all of these things.
Yeah.
So I think during that time, as I said, due to the resilience of our team and everyone just being really committed to creativity during this difficult time, we pivoted our project. And so we did we started with a virtual series, bringing together scientists, educators, artists, having conversations online about, what role can artists play in this larger conversation about climate change? What can we possibly do? And we then translated the work that we'd started doing in the studio into a site-specific work for film, as you mentioned. Our team collaborated with Ernesto Galan, who's a Boston-based filmmaker, extraordinary person to work with, collaborating with our science collaborator, Dr. Pratt. My brother, Grant Stinnett, also contributed footage to this work. The dancer, it was tough to be able to work inside. So we took our work outside and we set it site specifically on Jeremy Point in the Cape Cod area. It's the particular site that we chose actually had a village that was swallowed due to sea level rise. So we had an interesting experience sort of learning a lot about the site, its history, learning about other cultures around the world that are being forced to leave or forced to move together with folks from other cultures, you know the story. Yeah. It's a little bit about Surge.
Becoming too common, unfortunately. Just in today's Boston Globe, there's a story that sea levels will rise by 40 inches by 2070 in Boston, which is pretty significant. Well, if any of our viewers haven't seen it, I would suggest going to the Boston Dance Theatre website and taking a look at it. It's a beautiful piece of art, and it is very pertinent. Let's move on to where you are now. I mean, you are presenting, I would think, I might be wrong, but probably your first or close to your first live presentation since the pandemic started. And what's it feel like for the company to be working together and getting ready to perform live?
Yeah. So this is our first return to the theater space since 2019. And our last theatrical performance was on the stage at the ICA with Global Arts Live. So this feels, I just like the word that comes to mind is like paradox. It's like a weird, I feel like we were just there yesterday, but yesterday was like a year and a half ago. I'm just having that experience. I don't know if you're having that experience too, but I'll talk to a friend or I'll be like, I haven't talked to you in a while. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's been anyway, it's a weird time thing. But we're ecstatic. I mean, we're absolutely thrilled and feel so like honored and privileged to have work at this time, to be in the studio, to be sharing space, to be moving together, to be we were just talking about today in the studio, like that sensation of moving from dancing right in front of a wall to, performing to open space and to people. It's just it's hard to describe, to those who haven't experienced it themselves, but it's something we're really moved already. We're not even in the theater yet.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited. I'm excited for this weekend, and I know a lot of people are, because Saturday night is almost sold out. So if anybody is watching, get your tickets for Saturday if you want to come Saturday, and of course you can always come on Friday. There are tickets for that. So the company has been rehearsing throughout the pandemic. And you've been creating new work, and there are going to be 2 world premieres this weekend that we are going to be very privileged to see. Let's talk about the work with Rena Butler. Mm-hmm. So just tell me, I'm interested, how long does it take to create a work with a choreographer? You are a repertory company, and you commission choreographers to create new work. So just share a little about that process.
Yeah. So I would say, as we spoke before about the Surge project, Boston Dance Theater does do sort of long projects that take, are more iterative, and we develop over a longer span of time. But when we're preparing a work for our concert series, or in a performance like this in the theatrical space, usually we don't get the choreographer for very long. Actually, it's usually a week or 2 weeks. In this case with Rena, it was a 2-week residency. We were in Boston for 5 days with her, and then out in Gloucester at Movement Arts Gloucester for 5 days. And I think when considering the artists that we're going to bring in to collaborate with us for this kind of project, it has to be someone who we can trust. It's quite a bit of risk to invest, especially for, a small, growing company like Boston Dance Theater, to invest the time and the resources to someone and give them, free artistic reign to create something that we hope that audiences will enjoy and that will sustain in our rep for a long time. But Rena is absolutely an artist that I'd been following for a really long time. She's had an amazing career as a performer with Bill T. Jones, Kyle Abraham, was with Hubbard Street, is with Gibney now. And her choreographic voice really, I think in the last really 5 years, has matured to a place where everything that she makes, I think, is really profound, really beautiful, really important. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of nerve-wracking to have someone come in only for 2 weeks, but on the other hand, when you get the person in the room who you trust, things just magically sort of click and happen.
So this, you say you're a relatively new contemporary dance company, repertory dance company in Boston. You might be new, but the body of work that you have created and commissioned in the last, I don't know, since 2018, I think. So we're looking here at 4 years, and 18 months was a pandemic. And we really are still somewhat in that pandemic. It's incredibly impressive, and Boston has a lot to be proud of in the work that has been created, the quality of the company. So kudos to you and the effort that you're putting into it, the effort that your dancers and everybody that is involved with your company.
Thank
viewers,
you.
If you have, my pleasure. Viewers, if you have any questions, please write them up in the chat on the side, and we'll give them to Jessie when we open it up for questions. And you might also have questions for our next guest, who's going to join us now, Rosie Herrera. Hi, Rosie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolute. Good to see you. It's my pleasure. And I know that obviously you've spent a considerable amount of time with Jessie in creating the second world premiere of this weekend's performances. So why don't you talk a little bit from your perspective, setting a work on another company and how that all works for you? Because I mean, these are new dancers, you're meeting new movers.
Yeah.
Let's just find out a little bit about it.
Well, there were some familiar faces actually, because one of the dancers for the company, Isabel Veo, lived in Miami, and we did have
the Miami Cuban connection.
That we have that Cuban connection.
Right.
We know where we all are,
Right.
So I had some opportunity to work with him before, but every process is different. I've made work on a bunch of different companies, and every process is different. And I think for me, the way that I sort of navigate that is the conversation with the director. And so the conversations that I had with Jessie about, conceptually, some of the framework that we're working in, what would be useful in terms of the repertory of the company? What is the next phase of performance for the company? What are ways that I, as a teacher, as a mover, as a shaker, as a choreographer, could be helpful? And Jessie was the one who was bringing in this subject matter to me regarding Carol Kay, which, do you want to talk a little bit about that, Jessie?
I can, if that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rena and Rosie are our first ladies for the Carol Kay project, which Boston Dance Theater started, conceived pre-pandemic, started in the middle of pandemic, and it will continue after as well. So the concept is to amass a body of work from American women choreographers, all sort of it's quite open. I was thinking about this before this conversation, like, what exactly is this about? It's Carol Kay's story is just one that has so much substance to it. She was one of the only female session musicians in the 1960s in Los Angeles. She sort of made the transition from, heavy jazz, went into early rock. And there was a lot of stigma about jazz musicians going into sort of rock and pop culture at the time. Her being a woman, her being a mother, her raising her children as a single mother, supporting her mother. And the way that I arrived at this sort of fascination with Carol is through my late father, Jim Stinnett, who was a bass player. And so, you know, I knew that we wanted to make a program. Music is close to me. I'm also a trained vocalist, and I come from a family of musicians. So I knew we were interested in working with music and a musician in some way. And so we talked about, I had lots of late night conversations with my dad about all sorts of different people. And he was like, what about Carol? One day. And I was like, whoa, you know, her body of work, and I'll let Rosie take over from here.
Yeah, because this is where my ignorance comes to be interesting, right? Because Jessie was the first person to expose me of the work of this prolific recording artist, Carol Kay, and I felt like such a fool to have not known who she is and to not know the influence that she has had on so many genres of music. And just you know, I remember Jessie sending me the list of music from her library. And, you know, after downloading like 500, I was like, okay, well, where do I stop? You know, and it wasn't, you know, like obscure. I mean, we're talking about the Beach Boys, Barbra Streisand, Herbie Hancock, really just sort of the juiciest, most diverse group of artists. And so when I first started working with her music, I remember sharing this with Jessie that I was like a little bit intimidated. I've never really made a work inspired by or based on really anything other than myself and the dancers in the room. So having her presence, it's almost like the presence of absence was something that was clear in the room, not just for Carol herself, who was not present in the room, but also Jessie's father, who was a big part of this process, and his presence in the room, which was felt really deeply. And it sort of laid this foundation for, I think, a really vulnerable, open, raw state of sharing. So a lot of the barriers that we would maybe go through when you're first starting to work with people and you don't know them, it's kind of like you're dating and you're starting to get to know each other. The presence of the absence of these two people really laid a foundation that shifted things for us. And to me, if you don't mind if I talk a little bit about my work, it's called ofrenda, which in Spanish means offering. And to me, because I was struggling with this, you know, trying to just the presence of Carol and kind of what was resonating with me and what I felt was coming from the dancers, because this was really a collaborative work. I mean, really, the work is in collaboration with Jessie, with all of the dancers, with the costume designer. I mean, it really was a collaborative process. So quieting myself to see what is the piece that needs to exist in this space of collaborators, what kept coming up for me was sort of the genius of her in the face of sacrifice. As you know, she was a serious jazz musician, and well, she is still a very serious jazz musician, a musician in general. And she kind of stepped out of that world in order to provide for her family, to provide for her children and her own mother. And so through her sacrifice, there was such a she achieved such heights of mastery. And to me, that's a uniquely, you know, feminine, uniquely motherly genius that is so rare to see. I mean, people put a lot of focus and emphasis on what people give up, but not what people discover in that place of sacrifice. And so I was thinking a lot about her sacrifice sort of as a mother. And then, you know, of course, the conversation about motherhood and mothers and the roles of mothers and nurturers and providers sort of was present in the room too. So a lot of the material that comes from the dancers is around these questions of, you know, what does a mother do? You know, what does it mean to nurture? And yeah, so that's sort of the inspiration for my work with Carol.
Rosie, how long were you? I know that you did this in person in Boston. How long were you in Boston for?
What's 2 weeks? A little bit over 2 weeks, actually. A little bit over 2
okay.
weeks.
So that's on the longer end of the time periods that.
I disagree, Maury. I wish it was more.
Well, hey, you're always welcome. We'll have you around.
Come back.
I'm ready to come back. It was very easy to fall in love with Boston, and especially the company and ICA. I love the staff. I love the space. It was so amazing to be there as a very Caribbean person and a very tropical person. To be so close to the water was something that was just really moving for me. So I'm ready to come back.
Okay, I think you were probably here in like July or August or June.
Yes, I was.
And not
boy.
No, I was not there. I was not there with in the cold times.
Right.
No, my body rejects that.
February, you'd like.
I feel like you prepared us though for those long cold winter tours with the costuming. It's very exciting. We're wearing these amazing like warm track suits which keep us very safe and cozy. Much appreciated, and shout out to Zane Keeley for that too, our costume designer.
I just want to remind any viewer that has a question for Jessie or Rosie, please post it now because we've got about another 5 minutes left of the conversation. And so these aren't the only two works that we are going to see. I know that there are two other works which I'm actually going to put for the side at the moment. It's two brilliant works, two incredibly strong works from your repertory that we have presented before. And folks that haven't seen the company before, well, this is your chance to find out something about these other two choreographers and the work that goes with it. So Jessie, the company itself, how often do you rehearse?
Yeah, so we rehearse 5 days a week. I mean, pandemic times, things were very strange. But when, like, for instance, now preparing for this performance, it's 5 days a week. It's about 4 or 5 hours a day.
Okay, that's a significant amount. That's a lot of dedication. That is, I'm going to say it's a professional dance company. I mean, that's what you're doing every single day. And this, what I think is what is so exciting about your company and the quality that the company delivers. And I think that there's a great future ahead for the company. And I just know this from talking with you, that prior to the pandemic, you had a lot of touring lined up. And then it just, obviously, it went away. I hope that some of it is being rescheduled. I hope that there are plans with the presenters that, we were forced to shut down, that they are looking ahead and thinking about bringing you back in the near future. Rosie, for you, when you create work, you obviously, yes, I've heard your story, but you're bringing part of yourself and part of your history to this work, even if it's about a seminal musical figure. There's something that, so just tell us a little bit about what is that you're bringing, that personal, because, I prior to the conversation, I said, when I see your work, I think of Miami, even though I haven't really spent time in Miami. There's just something about your work that is very, it's doesn't feel like it's created in a cold climate, for lack of any better definition.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm happy to be an ambassador to Miami in every way that I possibly can, and I think you're right. Well, I of course, I would like to say, or one way that helps people create sort of context for my work is that I am a surrealist. And so much of surrealism is based in narratives that are steeped in many, many layers of symbolism. And so, for example, this work that we were, Ofrenda, which I created in collaboration with the company, is highly influenced by my research over the past 7 years in religious iconography, sort of broad strokes of religious iconography, and sort of I did a work about the deconstruction of the patriarchal Catholic iconography, and I did another work about the Virgin Mary, and then I've done a lot of works that are sort of inside of this vein of And I guess the best way to say it is like the otherworldliness or the inner worldliness. And so that definitely has shaped the way that I'm approaching process. But I also want to shout out the other collaborator, which I forgot to bring up, which was COVID. Because, you know, we said this, we gave credit to the costume designer, credit to the dancers. But when I was in rehearsal, I think my process was the first time in a year that the dancers were touching each other.
Oh.
And the navigation, I've never been in a process where I had to start on day one asking, you know, first, I never saw their faces. They were masked for the entire rehearsal process. And then asking questions around what is your comfort being touched, not being touched? How does that change from day to day? So many dancers were starving for touch, and some were wavering day in and day out about what they were comfortable with. The sort of intimacy that you have in a dance studio was like very, very clear and present in a way that it was unique to this time, because it's the trust that you put in each other extends not just from the esoteric, but to the literally putting each other's lives in each other's hands and trusting when you say that you haven't been to a party or a rave or, you know, you have to trust each other. And, you know, I think that a lot of art makers in general are realizing as they come back to their practice that things can't go back to the way that they were. They just can't. And in order to move forward, we have to sort of sit with the rawness and the fragility of the human spirit at this moment, and invite that in, celebrate it even if it's possible.
That's a good way of looking at it. I mean, when you mention, you know, just the trust, I mean, I just know for, you know, what we are having, all of us that are involved in the performing arts, just, you know, this week, Boston Dance Theatre would have been tested 4 times.
Wow.
So they can perform without masks.
Wow.
The audience will be fully vaccinated, and have to wear masks. And this is our this is our 4th live performance of the fall. And, you know, it is so rewarding as a presenter to be offering this gathering space again for artists and audiences. And the impact of people when they leave the theater, I mean, the look on people's faces, I mean, it's actually quite astounding. It's like they've just had, I don't know, a double chocolate thick malt milkshake. You know, I mean, it's, people are really just, there's something has fed the soul that hasn't fed the soul for a while. I know that we have a question. If we can just bring it up, please. This is for you, Rosie.
Sure. So David Henry asks, can I say something about how it was to get the dancers to realize your vision? That's a great question, David. I'll say that my vision was sort of growing with the dancers. So it wasn't necessarily like they're executing my vision, but the two of us, you know, both them and I are sort of listening in to see what it is that wants to be communicated in the room. I know that makes me sound a little bit too much like a shaman, but it's actually true. You know, if I don't come into the space, I come into the space because I'm a dance nerd with a lot of research and 1,000 options and costumes and ideas. But once I get there, really my practice is about quieting myself to listen to what I feel needs to be expressed in that room. But I do have techniques, actually. You know, there are processes that have worked and have not worked, that I can implement, you know, that I've learned over time. And that's a lot of task-based work. So let's say, for example, I'm finding that the dancers are very forward, you know, very presentational because the mirror or whatever that is. I might give them an exercise that makes them in touch with their organs so that they're moving from a place of experience versus from an aesthetic place. And I might say something like, your heart is a bell that you're ringing. And that might bring something different out of them. So there are some tools, but really we're developing that language together.
And David hasn't. David still got questions.
I love you, David. Thank you. David
Yeah,
asked, is there such a thing as too much surrealism? You tell me. I am a fan of a sort of blended art, work, life experience, right? And so I don't, whenever I sort of label myself as a dance theater artist or surrealist or cabaret artist or whatever, these are titles that are usually actually imprinted on me, and people say, this is what you do. And I'm like, sure, that seems to fit, if you want to give me your bag of your old grandma's clothes, I'll wear them and we'll see if it fits, right? And so, but when I sat with surrealism, I was like, wow, this makes sense, because I'm interested in the dream world. I'm interested in the sort of recreating of this dream world and sort of what that, not just mine, but that of the people in the room, dreamscaping, in the disarming potential of beauty, of how beauty has a capacity to, as I said, disarm and ask people to interrogate and to go deep, as does humor. And so I think that the only time that surrealism can be too much is like anything, if it feels disingenuous. Chocolate is amazing, but if you're eating it for the wrong reasons, it'll catch up to you.
Rosie, thank you. Jessie, thank you. Everybody that is I've been listening in and viewing this conversation. I sure hope that you join us over the weekend on Friday and Saturday. Rosie, it was a pleasure having you visit us in Boston virtually.
Thank you.
Jessie, I will see you on Friday.
Thank you, Maury.
Everybody, bring your vaccination certificate, bring your mask, and come and gather with us when we share in Boston Dance Theater this weekend. Thank you and good night.